Button. Good evening, everybody. We are meeting with Eoin Matthews, who is a bit of an internet geek and guru. So, Eoin, how are you? For a couple of things. Let's balance this out. Where are you?
I'm in Saigon right now. I'm in Ho Chi Minh City. So I'm in the Sofitel in Ho Chi Minh City, and in a few hours I'm going to take a flight to Cambodia to see Angkor Wat.
And so where were you born?
I was born in Ireland. I've got the remnants of an Irish accent, which has been diluted by 15 years of moving further west and west and west. And now I live in San Francisco, California. Okay.
And what do you do there?
In San Francisco, I head up Popt.com. And my pretty much all of my career has been in technology, as Paul mentioned, as you mentioned there. Most of it in e-commerce. So at big e-commerce companies like Buy.com, Rakuten, which a lot of people haven't heard of, but is one of the biggest e-commerce companies in the world. I think it's the third biggest e-commerce company in the world. And in moving to San Francisco, I also founded a few companies that both in the social media space and in email marketing or email sending space. It isn't really email marketing, but email sending space, which seems like a pretty boring space. But about a year ago, I started working on a project called Popt, and we launched it in August of this year. So I head up Popt, which helps artists and designers sell their stuff online. But primarily, actually, it's about them getting more customers. That's what we focus on, helping them get more customers online.
Helping artists get more customers.
It's a difficult problem. It's a really difficult problem.
No,
you have to focus on it.
It's for artists to get more customers. I just wanted a yes and the clarification first.
Yeah.
All right. So I have an interesting question for me. How do artists get in this equation? Other things that you've done have not been very specifically connected to the arts, have they?
Mm-hmm. No, what it ends up is, and I think this reflects a lot of people, is you have a passion and interest for the arts, but you have to pay the bills.
Okay.
And in paying the bills, you figure out how to do other things that are valuable. And for me, that was in the e-commerce space. But when I worked for big e-commerce companies, you don't get an enormous amount of satisfaction selling the same Samsung TV or the same Apple product day after day after day. It's not something that holds a huge passion for you. So what I really wanted to do was bring my love as a low quality artist together with my competence and expertise in e-commerce and online marketing, and sort of make those two worlds meld. So that's what I'm doing. I'd never put myself on a pedestal, say I'm an artist, but I'm aspiring.
Okay.
So,
on one hand, I think it's important to understand history and how we got to where we are, and for an artist to understand who Michelangelo is, and other artists of significance, and to have some ability to track their lineage, which to some extent suggests doing it the way others have done it before us. But on the other hand, I don't think it serves anybody to be anchored or tethered by it as opposed to anchored. Maybe anchored is okay, but tethered isn't so good, and I think a lot of where you're going isn't so much where others have been, but is going more in terms of what's possible. Do you see artists as early adapters? Do you see them as any different than any other subgroup?
I think they are. So I think there's two ways of looking. The way I look at the art world is there's a few ways you can function in it. And historically, the way you succeed career-wise is you have a patronage model. So, and that is still very prevalent today. It's sort of, you have major patrons who buy most of your works or who commission pieces from you, and that pays all the bills. And I think an extension of the patronage model is you become a brand in your own entity. So you become a blue chip artist and collectible. And to get to that path, it seems, and maybe this is unfair to some of the artists, it seems that it's as much about your network, which is also true of the patronage model. But if you think about that type of approach, there's a very limited number of spots at the top, and there's not much of a blue collar or even a middle class of working artists. And I think what in terms of artists being early adopters, online has really helped artists, and they are early adopters, because if you're an independent business person, like an entrepreneur artist, and by that I mean anybody who does everything for themselves, and most artists are solo business owners, they're doing everything. And in that scenario, artists tend to be early adopters. They tend to try things that nobody else is trying because they need to for their business. They need to make it work. And so I think if you look online, the earliest online stores, even at the same time as Amazon, were artists trying to sell online. And if you look at some of the biggest online success stories, they're driven by folks like artists who do all the marketing and sell all the products through those channels. And I do use the term artists more broadly than specifically fine art. I would include in that independent fashion designers and independent artisans who are making, unique products. So anybody who's really in that design or creative space.
How are artists using the internet? What's been happening in the last 5 years?
I think it was a good landmark in e-commerce, and it happened pretty accidentally. So if you're in the e-commerce space, you'd know about it, but if you weren't, you didn't. So first version of e-commerce online was, we'll call it Amazon and eBay. And one thing I should highlight about eBay sells a lot of art online. Like by most measures, it's somewhere between, I think it's about 300 million just for art that is under $150 in value per piece. That's about how much they sell. So you could probably assume that eBay sells anywhere from 600 million to 700 million total in art per year. They don't really disclose in detail per category. But anyway, so first version of online selling was eBay and Amazon, which we are all familiar with. And artists jumped on eBay. A lot of artists and a lot of gallerists jumped on eBay, but it doesn't look great. But the first major separator was Etsy. And what was different about Etsy from what went before is that it had a design-centric feel. And it's reflected in a few other sites. Pinterest sort of followed this through and took it to the next level. And in one sense, what they really represented was Amazon and eBay were e-commerce for men, whereas Etsy and Pinterest was e-commerce for women. And it reflected in how the spending online began to shift from men being sort of this dominant force and being the ones who opened up the purse to actually all of the power moving to women buying online and making decisions in websites that actually catered and served products up in the way that women and design-centric people wanted to see them. And it's worth mentioning that eBay and Etsy sort of follow a similar model. If you look at their origin story, if you want to, Pierre Omidyar founded eBay, and it was early sellers who jumped on board, and it was everything from people, primarily in eBay's case, selling used product, to motor people who wanted to sell their cars. But eBay didn't do any marketing. The people who did the marketing were sellers. And this is a commonality you see in multiple platforms. And so if you look at Etsy, you have a similar story, and Etsy would be much more relevant to the group, that we cater to and help, in that Etsy started because folks were upgrading a craft forum, the founders of Etsy. And if anybody's not familiar with Etsy, you should really check it out. It's a fantastic platform to sell on. A lot of people, probably especially for lower value items and to build an audience. But there's real sales on Etsy. But the Etsy guys were helping the Crafter forum do a forum upgrade. And they read the threads and they noticed that all the craft people on Crafter were complaining about eBay. They just said that their products were getting buried. Because on eBay, you're talking about hundreds of millions of listings. And the Etsy guys, they weren't even Etsy at that time, but they suggested to the Crafter owner that she open a marketplace, but she wasn't interested. And then they said, well, if we start one, will you promote it? And that was agreed that they do that. And so Etsy didn't do it, again, like eBay, didn't do any marketing at the start. But what happened was the sellers who really needed a new platform to sell on did all the marketing. And what you see there is that truly the marketing engine and the power for those types of communities and platforms, both eBay and Etsy, was actually the individual sellers. They brought the customers to those platforms. They developed those markets over time. And this unfortunate thing happens as marketplaces grow, is that the marketplace then owns the customer. And that seller that actually brought the audience to the platform gets disintermediated. They lose that one-on-one connection with their own customer. And so Etsy now, if you fast forward 8 years, is at that similar scale. And I think Etsy, by its nature, has a different DNA as a company than eBay. And so it actually helps the seller community a lot more than eBay does. But still, as an Etsy seller, you're somewhat disintermediated from your customer. You're not really able to engage them in a one-on-one way than you would if you were able to run your own store. I think the other thing that's changed the last 5 years that's really highlighting is it's really easy to get your own store up and running, and it's and to get a good store up and running. So it's very difficult to sell stuff from your own website because you haven't got a brand, but at the same time, it's an important presence. And so whether you look at something like Big Cartel, and I think it's better to look beyond the pure art domain, the best e-commerce platforms for artists are not for artists. They're for businesses. And so you could look at Big Cartel would be really, really strong. I think Shopify is a platform if you want to get really sophisticated, has all the bells and whistles. And so if you're an artist looking to start up your e-commerce side, at least the operational pieces are very easy and very cost effective for putting together. You don't need to hire anybody. You can do it all yourself with drag and drop tools. It's super cheap. It's super easy. And so there's nothing stopping you on that front except a few hours devoted to getting yourself set up.
I don't think most artists who consider themselves fine artists want to do e-commerce per se, but are not opposed to consigning their art or listing their art on a website that might, consummate the sale and, take a percentage or get a fee for it. Tell us about your website and what distinguishes it.
Sure. Well, there's a specific problem we're trying to tackle, which is the part about how do you get customers and how do you grow your customer base. And so
now, when you say that, you mean you as a company or you as a visual artist?
We think about the problem as a company to help artists as an individual artist in terms of how can an individual artist get more customers. And it's a very simple approach, but it actually is modeled on what works in the real world, which are group shows. Like if I'm an artist putting on a show, and we've all done this, if you go to individual shows, the artist has to promote it themselves, the artist and the gallerist, if they've got a gallerist putting the show on for them. And it's a lot more difficult to get people to come to the opening. It's a lot more people to come on a steady basis for however long the show is open. If you do stuff in a group show, just by the fact that it's a group, you reach more people. So if you do a group show and there's 10 other artists in a group show, your work is going to be seen by probably 10 or more people than you would be able to get coming alone. And that's the simple premise behind Popt. What we let artists do is put together group shows online, which are much easier to do than group shows offline. If you think about it, really in that case, it's just a curated selection of products. And so in Popt's world, what happens when you do a group show on Popt is that every artist in the show is automatically promoting the event. And by automatically, I mean promoting the event. We actually connect to email lists, we connect to social media, so that when this group show starts online, you know that every other artist is really promoting it because Popt actually pushes out the communication on behalf of each artist. It's worth noting there that the messaging all comes from the artist. So you can control over what is actually said. It looks like your email, there's no Popt branding on it, but these messages are pushed out to promote the online group show. And so that's how we think about it. We think the easiest way for you to grow your audience as an artist is to actually partner with other artists. And you should be doing everything else. There's no one solution for everybody, but this is the best. This is what we believe is one of the essential ways for you to grow your audience and artists, because you're just partnering with other complementary artists who've already built that audience in their community. One of the main reasons this really works is that for most artists, their audience is very geographically controlled and constrained. And that's because if I'm in San Francisco, I do my shows in San Francisco. That's where most audience. And we talk to lots of artists, and most people sell very locally. And so to sell beyond your local audience, you need to get some distribution elsewhere. So maybe you do some shows in another city, but unless you show up, you're not going to build up as much traction there. Maybe you do some online sales and you build up some audience there. But if you think about it, if you partner regularly with complementary artists in other cities or other states, you're going to get regular exposure to the buyers in those states and those cities. So that's how we think about it. It's an opportunity for you to become less geographically constrained by just partnering with other artists who've got similar tastes and similar audience to you.
Do these group shows have finite duration? Do they have a start date and an end date?
Yes, they absolutely do. I think it's one of the things as an artist you need to begin to think about when you sell online is, what are the trigger points that you can press in the buyer's mentality. And I think this is where e-commerce can seem like an enigma, but artists actually have an awful lot of control. And this extends the whole way through the display process. I'm going to call it merchandising because that's really what it is. The merchandising process online, through the terms and conditions, right through to little cues that users put a lot of value on, like scarcity and time, temporal factors. So we definitely push heavily on the fact that these are time limited shows, that there's only a couple of days left, that you can't actually see the products until the show starts. So you can build up a bit of an RSVP list, because scarcity is one of those few pieces of pressure that an artist can use with their buyers, because there's typically only one piece. And if you're going to do prints, only do limited editions, or say that they're limited editions, because it gives an important impetus for the buyer to make a move now, as opposed to going into consideration mode.
So I'm an artist.
Does that make sense?
Together with it does. So I'm an artist. I get together with 3 or 4 of my friends. I create a group show on trees that have horizontal branches. And I put together this show, and then we send it to our email lists, and it's some format that's provided by you. You don't even get a hold of do you or don't you snag the people's email addresses?
Here's how, you're sort of right in general terms, but here's how it really works. So on Popt is anybody can be a curator. Like in a way, this is the sort of important part of it. Anybody can curate a show. So you push that show, a concept show essentially, out into the Popt community of artists. And at this point, there's over 1,000 artists on Popt. So you push that show out, and we send out regular email messages. And the only people actually Popt sends email messages to is our own list of artists. So we'll send out an email list saying, hey, here are the upcoming shows that people are putting together. Certain curators in our system can be paid. This is sort of a new feature. So if it's a top tier curator, somebody with a lot of pull, they can actually define submission fees and sales commission fees that they want to be paid. But we only let very established folks do that. But anyway, so anybody can curate a show, and therefore anybody can submit products to a show. And it's up to the curator to decide whether the submitted works, the submitted pieces, are suitable for their specific show. When the show's start date then kicks off, Popt kicks into action. And what we do then is, when you set up your Popt account, we've already uploaded your email list and we've connected to your social media accounts. And so you don't need to do anything when the event starts. What happens is Popt automatically sends out an email on your behalf to your email list, and it's branded in your name. So you don't even need to send out that email, and you don't even need to do that social media post. We do it for you automatically, and you have complete control over what that content is. So when that event starts, as you said, Paul, it's automatic distribution to all of the community for all of the artists in the show.
But if me and Susie just wanted to do our own 2-person show, we could do that.
You could totally do that, because you'd be the curator and you'd invite Susie, and then everybody else you'd reject. Not that that's your spirit, but that you would, in that case, you only want to do a Paul and Susie show.
Interesting. Okay, so in the chat box, people are talking a bit about Sachi. How did they get so big? How good a model is that? Are they serving it well? Are people getting lost in there? Do you aspire to being a competitor? Pick any question you want to go with. You just froze again, or one of us did.
They got going. We've got the Sachi name.
Okay.
And so Sachi, from what we understand, the different sites that sell art aren't reporting a lot of sales figures, but Sachi seems to be doing quite well. I think there's a few venues probably doing better. Etsy, I think, is a significant. It's a different marketplace. Etsy has many different types of products. There's a lot more art being sold on Etsy than is being sold on Sachi. For higher end stuff, for definitely just primarily for blue chips, from what I understand, Artsy is doing great. But again, you have to be probably in stratospheric blue chip, and they're not selling an awful lot of volume. It seems to be one-off sales, but it's a beautiful site and it's well done. So I think there are a range of venues out there. Sachi is one of them, and you've got to probably test it and decide which venues work for you. The problem you're going to have with certain venues is you don't really have much control other than listing. Like literally as an artist, what you do, you list and you hope that you appear. And an example I like to use here is one of the most popular websites out there in the art community in the entire world. I think it's probably the most popular, is DeviantArt. If you're not familiar with DeviantArt, check out DeviantArt. It's a huge platform. But DeviantArt gets about 30 million visitors a month. And if you look on the flip side of that, though, DeviantArt gets about 7.5 million to 8 million new pieces of work posted per month. So it's an enormous volume, and that's the reality of global creativity. There are billions of pieces of new videos, art being created all the time. And DeviantArt is primarily just visual, like it's mostly design, it's mostly a mixture of illustration and fine art. So there's about approaching 10 million, if it hasn't surpassed 10 million already, about 10 million pieces of new art being pushed to a community of 30 million people. So I'd have to use, if I'm an artist and think about it, I've got basically 4 sets of eyeballs dedicated to my piece per month on DeviantArt, and it's one of the biggest platforms. Now, of course, people on DeviantArt are going to see more than just one piece, but you still need to think about these platforms in terms of metrics. And so for you as an artist posting on any platform, you can either post and hope that you do better than four sets of eyeballs, which would be the case in DeviantArt if you're average, or you somehow control the flow of eyeballs to your work. And I think that's the key piece in terms of me and Popt, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to give you control so that you're not in this massive competition that is ultimately controlled by a popularity algorithm. It doesn't matter what website you sell on, whether it's, again, Sachi or Artspan or Artsy or DeviantArt, if you're selling prints in DeviantArt. It doesn't matter where you sell. You're on all of those platforms, you're in a popularity contest. And if your work is not inherently viral, if it's not driving high user interaction, the algorithm will push you down. And the algorithm will push you to the tail, because those platforms are not good at dealing with niche curated sets of work. So that's where I would suggest that for any artist, they need to focus on the marketing side as well as the e-commerce side. And this is the unfortunate thing. It goes back to your earlier question of, are artists innovators? Innovators are people who have to do stuff. I don't really think anybody wants to be an innovator, but if Henry Ford had to get to point B over there, he had to make a car to get there because it was a little bit too far, or the horses couldn't get there, or whatever. So I think artists are innovators. I really
disagree. I think people innovate because they can't help themselves, just like artists because they can't help themselves. You know,
no,
I think an innovator is with a beer can in his hand or her hand, going, "Wait a minute, if I don't."
Well, the innovator with the beer can might create beer pong or something. But most people at that point are only pontificating, speculating, navel-gazing. But I think the people that put down the beer can and actually make something and actually are filling out a specific function. It's driven by very specific need. I've definitely found in the companies that I've started, they were always driven by a very specific need. There was a problem that we didn't encountered previously, and so Popt is like that. I'm not creating Popt for any other reason than it's a problem I needed solved of how do I get eyeballs to the type of work that I do, but that isn't going to be massively popular if it's on a competition, a popularity contest on Etsy or Artsy or anywhere else where I can't control the traffic. I'll just extend about that, Paul. There's another way of looking at it. This is, if you've been in e-commerce again a long time, you begin to think about it at a macro level. If I think about online e-commerce, the conversion rate for a good e-commerce site is about 2%. And for an art site, it's significantly less, because art is viral and pretty, but it's not purchased online at a 2% conversion rate. So it's probably closer to 1% for art. So that's 1% conversion rates means 1 in 100 people visiting that site are going to buy something. If it's a good site, if it's a crap site, it's much lower than that. It really is much, much lower. And anybody who has Google Analytics or any tracking on their own art website will attest to that. So that's 1 in 100 are going to buy. If I think about me sending out an email, then if it's a good email, if it's a really good email, I'll get a 10% click-through rate. If it's average e-commerce, it's going to be less than 5%, a less than 5% click-through rate. So now you talk about, let's say I'm that good guy and I get 1 in 10 people from my email clicking through. That means that 1 in 1,000 people are going to buy my work for each email campaign I got to do. And those are actually good metrics for e-commerce. So now you get a sense of that 4 eyeballs that you get on DeviantArt. They're not going to be enough to sell a lot. So you as an artist, where you have to really innovate is getting enough eyeballs to your work. And some of that involves listing in the right venues and hoping that you're going to get exposure. It also gives you some validation when you list on sites. I don't mind saying it. I think it actually is good for you to list on a site like Sachi, because there's still some association with Sachi's quality name and art. But at the same time, you need to somehow figure out how to get 1,000 sets of eyeballs to your work, which is the marketing funnel piece of e-commerce. And that's not easy. If I'm sure most people on this call I've got a Facebook page, for example. There's not that many artists beyond their friends and family who have 1,000 Facebook followers. And there are very, very few when it comes down to raw numbers who have more than 10,000. And we do this at Popt. We connect to people's Facebook accounts. Like, we know how many followers people have on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And it's a lot of work to build those followings. And even when you've got your following on Facebook, to actually look at the number of likes as compared to the number of followers, they're not that high numbers. They're very depressing numbers for most artists. And so you can see that conversion funnel becomes very difficult, very, very difficult in terms of getting enough people to look at your work. And so that's where the group show comes back into effect. This group show is a very powerful way of you finding other folks. You bring your 200 loyal followers out of maybe 1,000 total followers and pool them with 200 followers from Paul, 200 followers from Sally, 200 followers from Mary, and so on. So you're actually beginning to get that reach that you need.
What does all this imply about where the art world is going?
Well, I think the art world is going wherever the broader economy is going. I think at a macro level, as artists thinking about how to do their work, you can look at 2 big trends. One is that there's hopefully it's not irreversible. There's an irreversible macro trend around overall economics where the wealthiest people are making more money. And so you can call it an eroding middle class, whatever you want, but it's well documented on discretionary income side that I think it's about 70% of discretionary income now is spent by the top 20%. That's it. So, and it didn't used to be like this. Go back 20 years, it was more like 50% was spent by the top 20%, and the middle class actually had some discretionary income. So as you think about selling art, and I'm talking here art that's probably going to cost more than $150. There's sort of that threshold, and it's a good threshold to think about. It's sub $150, and we'll maybe come back to that later. But if I'm trying to sell art, it's becoming increasingly about that top 20%. And it was always about wealthy people, especially for the more expensive art and the patron world. It was definitely about the wealthiest folks. But this is getting more concentrated over time, and it's getting more competitive as a result. It's more difficult. There are more people trying to sell to those artists. There are more artists out there. And so that's something where you have to have in the back of your mind. The second thing that's happening is, e-commerce is growing. But something that's interesting about e-commerce is in reality, it's folks who are a little bit younger than me even, but folks who are 35, so late Gen X and Gen Y millennials, they grew up buying online. And so they're comfortable with buying everything online. And we're definitely seeing this in the art world, where it used to be a case that online art supported gallery shows and supported everything else. And that's why you can explain the fact that Christie's only sells 20 million a year online, but they're doing 4 billion plus in auction sales. But there's a whole generation of young buyers, and Silicon Valley, where I live, is well demonstrate this. Folks who have only grown up buying online. It's how they feel comfortable buying. And so you see that generation now coming into decent income because they're in their 30s, some of them are in their early 40s. And so they're comfortable spending a lot of money online, and they're comfortable evaluating products online. So that means that the big trend you see there is that artists are able to make an income selling online, building a brand online and doing it all online. So I'd look at those 2 things in parallel. Those are the trends that are important right now. And from a societal perspective, you can hope, and I think most people would hope, that income is not so concentrated and wealth is not so concentrated at the top. But that's not going to get reversed anytime soon. And so the reality of you being an artist is that's your market. That's it right now, that top 20%. I hate to say that exclusively though, but I really think there's a big market for the sub 150 for really good work. And we talk to a lot of artists and have a lot of artists on our platform who make real income on prints and on merchandise. And you don't have to do a lot of work to get that business up and running. And it's not just an income play, it's also a branding play. If you sell a lot of prints, if you sell a lot of work at sub 150, you build up a following, you build up a real awareness. And there's some young artists and career artists who are doing really interesting stuff in terms of using online to grow and grow their audience and to get alternative income streams going.
Your mentality is to do broader pieces or to do additions and to keep it accessible to a broader base, and to keep the price down, as opposed to fewer pieces, more unique, higher prices?
I don't think it's necessarily that case. So there's many different strategies, Paul. I honestly think there's different ways to slice and dice it. So there's no one set formula. I think the first thing is to have a type of work that really speaks to your own voice. And this sounds cliched, definitely cliched to me, but if you actually go look at the artists who are doing well online, they have a theme to their work. Like it's really strong theme. They have their own brand, and it's a distinctive look. And I think that's the first thing. So you can't escape the fact that you have to have quality work that reflects you. We did a big survey earlier this year of artists, and what was really interesting is the artists who were doing less than 10,000 a year in revenue through selling their art were almost consistently across the board landscape oil painters. Like it's just almost like, and I mean, it's gorgeous works, and it was a mixture of seascapes and landscapes, but that there wasn't enough in their work that distinguished them from the rest of the field. Because especially if you're looking at work online, and if the artist isn't right beside you telling you about it in a gallery environment, it's very hard to make a landscape or a seascape stand out. So the stuff that tends to sell online tends to be a very unique theme, a really strong theme. So I don't think go broad at all. I actually think it's more about having a very specific voice and developing it from there. Online can support niches, and it can support real authenticity. The second thing about pricing, the pricing part is really interesting because there's a bunch of different strategies here, and I'm a big fan of what I call anchoring. And the idea of anchoring is you want to make yourself seem like prestige, like if you're an artist. And so the easy way to think of anchoring is, if I put out post an original piece of work on my site and priced it at $5,000, a decent price, and I mark it as sold out, and I don't care, I'm just going to say I don't care whether it's sold out, but basically I'm saying it's unavailable, and then next to it or related to it, I offer a print, and I offer a print of the same piece, and I price it at $250. All of a sudden, that $250 print looks very affordable next to the $5,000 original. The fact that the $5,000 original is sold sends a signal to the buyer of, oh, this person has real clout. This person is a real artist. This $250 print, the one that I'm not going to really be very annoyed about if it arrives and I don't love it, this $250 print is good for me. This canvas, it could be print on canvas, it could be original print. Now, of course, that print product has to be good. It has to be really high quality. And whether it's canvas or it's museum quality, archival paper, however you're choosing, whatever medium for printing. But prints online are a perfect vehicle. That sub $400 price is really important to get to. And it doesn't mean your originals have to be that priced that way. But it does mean that you need to offer products. Everything over, you need to think about everything over $400 as being a highly considered purchase. And think about it, everybody can think about it in terms of how they might spend $400. So if you think about buying a TV, that's probably the transaction, the purchase that most people have made, that they understand, that they've made online, that they understand a lot of consideration went into, and it's over $400. Not a case for many people, it's over $1,000. And people spend a lot of time buying a TV. They might spend 3 months looking at all the options. That's a lot of money to spend online. As soon as you get below 400 and certainly below 250, people make decisions much quicker. And so if you can offer a product to those buyers online, you get real engagement. And I think the key thing that you're trying to counter with most online buyers is most people don't want to feel like a fool. In a gallery, you can make people feel special, and you can enrich that experience for them, and you can give them the personal story. With online, and especially with expensive products online, you have a fear factor. That's a very real fear factor, and you need to counteract that. And you need to do it subtly. Like you need to do it subtly. And the ways of doing it subtly are what the cues that buyers are looking for are, first of all, this person's is already in demand. So I'm not just making a decision in isolation. This person's already cool. And you have to send these signals subtly. And so an example of that might be, how do you indicate your popularity? It might be simple things like how many people are following you on Facebook, how many people like that work, how many other pieces have you sold? Is the piece sold out? That sort of stuff. And even your bio begins to really matter then. This sense of success. Where have you exhibited before? Who's bought your work? Whatever you can do to make that person feel good. Another part that's really, really subtle, but that's really effective, is around what I call the basics of e-commerce, the shipping and returns. And artists don't think about this, but it's really, really important. If I'm buying a piece of art and the artist priced the shipping honestly, I'm not going to buy it. And here's why. Like, let's say someone prices their work at $100 and the shipping is $150, which if it's coming to me framed and insured, it's going to cost $150. It's going to cost an expensive amount of money, maybe $80 if you're good at it. So all of a sudden, for me as a buyer, I have 10% or 15% of the cost is going to FedEx. And most people hate that. They really hate that idea of spending money on shipping. It's a weird, we're not very good economics machines as buyers. And so as artists, the easy thing to do is go, here's a piece that costs $1,150 and shipping is free. It's the same price to the artist, but for the buyer, it's a completely different mindset. And you just need to play that game, because what you're trying to do for the buyer is make them not feel like a fool or make them not feel like they're wasting money. Spending $100 on shipping always feels like it's wasting money. So don't put the price on the shipping. Make it easy, or put a low cost on the shipping, $10. And then the other thing to think about is returns. Like, a buyer might have buyer's remorse. Now, most buyers are too lazy to return stuff, but a bit like every e-commerce venue that we all love buying on, give someone a 30-day return window. Just say, if you're not happy and you can return it in pristine condition, I'll accept a return for 30 days. You can even have a restocking fee. You can say, return shipping, you have to pay for return shipping, and I charge a 10% restocking fee, because that'll cover your outbound shipping. But you mightn't even need to do that. But make it easy for the buyer, because the first check mark that you need to do for an online buyer is, don't feel scared, you're not going to get duped. That's it. You need to make them feel that, and then they can feel the passion and enjoy the story. I want to do an extension of that, Paul, which is something artists don't do well online. It's a very simple thing, which is around listing, just the listing itself. And let's just start with product photography, just basic merchandising of product photography. And you should go and look at non-art products to start with. So look at companies that you think do this really well. But if I look at art that's sold really well online, you're going to have three types of photo of the art. One is you're going to have a really close-up detailed shot that is the art itself. And most artists that I see trying to sell online stop there. They put up a photo of the art. It's nowhere near enough, because it doesn't say anything to me. That shows me, that's basically a digital representation of it. What you need next is the hanging shot. And the hanging shot shows the art hanging in a home. And that gives me as a buyer a sense of scale. But also, if you do it really well, it gives me a sense of who the target market for this work is. And so the home, or the wall that it's hanging on, should be an aspirational wall. It should be a wall in a home that I aspire as a buyer to owning and living in. It should be a really good wall. So your background wall there, Paul, that's terrible. It's not an aspirational wall. I'm talking about, and the artists who do it really well. Find a great wall, and you can fake this. Just Photoshop it in, but have the two things you're trying to do are, one is have it hanging in such a way that I get a sense of proportion. Do I know it'll fit my wall very well? And then the second part that I want to know is, this is a cool wall. The house that they shot this in is the type of buyer I want to be. Someone who has a lovely home. And so that's a really fine-tuned process that it behooves a lot of artists to spend a bit of time on. Find those interior shots that you can Photoshop your work into. Or if you really want to do it well, find a place that you can shoot in regularly. There's a third type of shot that is what I'd call the validation shot. So if I think about to recap, the first shot is the basic, high quality, zoomed up, it's all about the art. The second shot is the hanging shot, which gives me a sense of space and aspiration. The third shot is the validation shot. The validation shot might not even have the art in it, and it might be a sequence of shots, but it should show the artist. It should show the artist at work, and it should show the artist's work in a gallery with just people buzzing around, because they are validation to the buyer that this person does gallery shows. People go to those gallery shows. And I'm a little bit of a cynic when it comes to stuff. I don't even care whose gallery show picture you show. Just show people at an art gallery looking at art. Ideally your art, but it doesn't have to be your art. Just put that picture up there, because you're sending a little bit of a signal to the buyer of people come to this person's art shows and look at their work hanging. And similarly with the with the shot of you, what you're achieving there is something most US e-commerce companies don't really do. Like US companies tend to focus on the product shots. But if I was to look at a product being sold in China and Japan a lot, very little product is put out there online without a face in it. And so by putting your face up there, you get this little human contact that's really important to people. And if it's a good shot, it should be a good shot of you at work, eye to eye, and make a human contact. And these shots are, this is your 5% or 10% increase in the chances of this person buying your work or following you and sharing your work. But they're really important shots, and most artists don't think about it, but they're just as important as the product photography. They really are, because they move it from the realm of, oh, I'm looking at a piece of art online, to I'm considering purchasing this. And you need to pay similar attention to, this is basics again, but pricing is really important, because you got to decide whether it's priced to sell or whether it's priced to anchor prestige. So I'd go back to that earlier when we talked about the options about how you can approach the market. Price under $250 if you really want to sell stuff, but that means you're now a $250 original artist, which I don't know that many people want to be. And you got to decide, if you turn out your work really quickly or whatever, then perhaps that's viable. But in reality, you probably want your originals to be much more expensive, and so you can list them at whatever price you want online. Just remember that, and it's valuable to even list something and use the sales mechanics to do a flash sale on your art that you want to get rid of, and show markdown prices. People will buy art because it's on sale. People will do that. Sales actually work.
Do you guys have any questions that you want to ask Owen? Raise your hands. I got a question. All right, hold on. I got a question. Let me ask Kathy first. Kathy, go ahead.
Okay, so I have a couple questions. One, what do you charge the artist, if anything, to be on your site? And two, if you don't charge the artist, how do you make money? And three, if you're an artist that has been, and I'm sure many of the artists that are in the group are people who have been showing their art for a while and selling their art for a while. So if you're one of those artists and you're selling your work for a lot more money than this $250 or $400 or whatever, how do you deal with the fact that you're out there selling your work for more money, and then you go online and you're trying to sell your work for so much less, for example? Like, how do you reconcile that? I mean, the people who do buy your work, if they're to see that these things are being sold for so little, people are going to get, your normal, collectors and different people are going to get pissed off. So anyway, those are my general questions to start off with.
Cool. So good questions. I'm going to try to remember them and answer them in order.
Okay.
One is, I'll start off with Popt pricing. Popt has 2 tiers of pricing. So first of all, it's free to list on the site. There's no cost. We do review every artist who signs up, and so we want to make sure it's artists who actually participate. But the way the pricing works is, if you sell something to an existing customer, you pay essentially nothing. But you pay 3.5% on that sale. And so all of that, if you've sold online, that there are credit card fees. So if you sell something to an existing customer, somebody who's on your email list, or somebody who clicks through to an event on Popt through your Facebook profile, that's actually just nothing, free for you. So 3.5% is what we take, and that goes towards transaction fees. If you sell something to a new buyer, you pay 7% plus that transaction fee. So it essentially works out to be about 10%. And you pay 10% total. So that includes the transaction fee plus that new customer fee. And that's how Popt makes money. We make money doing what we say we'll do, which is getting new customers. And it's a pretty small amount. We wanted to make it this no-brainer amount, so it's very affordable. So on your second point, which I think is just really interesting, is I don't think you should have different pricing, but I think it might be just a different market. So let's say you're selling at 2,000 plus price point. So first of all, there is a market for $2,000 plus originals online. There's a big market for that. Mm-hmm. And when we spoke earlier about, you know, the Gen Xers and the millennials coming into some income, those folks feel a lot more comfortable buying art online. And I think, you know, there's a higher, what I'd consider the absolute threshold online is 15,000. There's definitely been more expensive stuff being sold online, but it's actually difficult to do a transaction for more than 15,000. So the people that are spending more than 15,000 online are doing big wire transfers, and they're probably professional buyers. Mm-hmm. So by that, I mean, they've probably already looked at your work somewhere else. And so they're doing the transaction online, but they've seen your work. For below 15,000, you can do a credit card transaction. You can do a credit card transaction. 10,000 really will be it for most people, but we'll say 15,000. And you can do a lot of wire transfers. So there's a real market there. But don't have different pricing for your buyer, for like your buyers on all channels. I'll call them channels, should have the same pricing. But what you can do online that is more difficult to do offline is that idea of anchoring the price. So I'd go back to that. So you might have the original that's 5,000 or 8,000, and then your prints are 250. Mm-hmm. And the other thing with that is that should be easy online. Like doing an offline, a gallery show, most artists we talk to, if they're really, really productive, can do 4 shows a year tops. Most people are doing 2. 2 shows a year is a lot of work for most artists. Whereas online, you can do a show every 2 weeks, and you sort of should be doing a show every 2 weeks to keep your audience engaged. So I think about it more as it should be easy to do. This should be the easiest channel to run. It's a way to both build the audience but never undermine your, if I call it the offline buyer, never undermine their pricing, because you're dead right. That's sacred, that group. And so you're not chipping them, but you want to sort of, if anything, give them a consistent place. What you will be able to do though quite well then is if you leverage your offline buyers, your gallery viewers, begin to get them to spread the word for you, because those followers are the ones, those who have your work, have the most motivation to tell other people about your work. Mm-hmm. And so let me give you a simple example of that. I actually think of artists, it even gets more difficult than you having to be an independent operator. You need to be what we'd call a multi-channel retailer, because you're actually selling offline and online. So that makes it even more difficult. You're not just Amazon, you're Home Depot. You've got a bunch of stores, plus you sell online. Mm-hmm. And one of the cool things you can do to connect those worlds is something as simple as a QR code. And it's a little anomalous feature. We actually include it on Popt because I think it's important. But you can generate a QR code and put it next to your work, and you can link it. The whole point of a QR code is you can link it to any website. So let's say someone's looking at your work in a gallery and they're vacillating. They're not going to buy, or you're not there. Give them a QR code so they can scan it and they can look at the original online. They can save it for later, or they can even buy a print. You know, they can buy a print while you're not there. So that $8,000 original, even in a gallery, by just having a QR code, someone can scan it with their mobile phone, bring them to a website and show it. And so in Popt, we make it easy. We generate the QR codes for you and you can print them out and attach them next to the work. But that's a simple way to connect the online and offline worlds.
Mm-hmm. So are you, when people sign up and they want to do an email online show, what happens with the our email lists? Do we download them to your site, or how does it work? I mean, if you have your work, like I have all my lists on MailChimp. So do you have to like upload all those lists to your site? And if so, are you keeping those lists, or what goes on with those lists?
So right now, yes, you have to do exactly that. And we get no rights to your list. Those lists are only used for the communication you tell us to use them for, which for most people is just when you participate in an event on Popt, that automatically we ping that list with a message from you. So it actually looks like, if in my case, it would be, the email will come from Eoin.Matthews@gmail.com. So it doesn't come from Popt.Popt.com. It comes from the individual artist. I should have mentioned earlier, one of the companies I founded was in 2008. It was a little company called SendGrid. And SendGrid was started to send email for people who have email lists. And so it's actually a bit of a competitor with MailChimp. But SendGrid, I think, sends more emails than anybody else in the world now. It sends about 15 billion emails a month. And they're mostly transactional emails. And people don't realize, but sending emails and getting emails delivered is a really difficult job. And so MailChimp does a great job with it. So Popt, essentially you upload your email list to Popt, and then we send the email message out. Also, I should mention this, that your email list on Popt, we're trying to build it over time. So we actually try to get more subscribers to your list. So the list you download from Popt, let's say one day you go, I never want to sell on Popt again. I'm a big deal. I'm a blue chip artist. You download your list. It should actually be bigger than the one you uploaded at the start, because we try to get people to subscribe to you. But to answer one specific question.
Okay, go ahead quickly, but we only have time for a couple more questions, so I'm going to let some other people ask. But
cool.
If you want to go ahead.
So I just wanted to say quickly, we don't get any rights to your list. Your list is your list, so we don't get any rights to send the messages that you don't want to send.
Okay, thank you.
Michael Abraham, briefly, go ahead and ask your question.
Hello. Hi, Eoin. Just have a question. I deal with a commercial gallery. They don't like me selling prints through them. They didn't want to handle my sculptures. So I was going to do that online. And then they didn't like that I was pricing work online. And then I talked to a few friends that work in galleries, and they're like, yeah, you shouldn't price work online. You're bringing your whole brand down. And I'm like, okay, so the gallery system's not allowing me to survive financially using the internet. They don't think it, what's the word? It doesn't keep me up, knocks me down. So I'm a little confused with, sometimes I think I don't even want a gallery, even though I've been with a gallery for 22 years, 2 different galleries, or more than 2. But so I'm kind of wanting to move into the internet age and broaden my network. Any thoughts?
So I think there's a good analog here. So first of all, I think there are a lot of great galleries out there. So I'm not going to poo-poo. Most art sales are still done offline. So if art is a 66 billion a year business, and only 1.5 billion of that apparently is being done online. So, and that's much smaller than the rest of e-commerce. So most of it is still happening now. I want to about that number. Most of that is still blue chip. Most of that is still Christie's and Lloyd's and other folks. So for the working artists, you've got to look at your individual gallery relationship and see, are they pulling their weight? Are they doing everything for you that you need done? In terms of selling online and the pricing question, I would look back to fashion brands. Top tier fashion brands used to have the same philosophy 15 years ago when, e-commerce started out. So Gucci and Yves Saint Laurent, people who price at a huge premium wouldn't price online. They wouldn't sell online, and they were like, this is not a channel. But then they realized that actually it goes back to that anchoring. What you can do online is you can price it at any price you want. It doesn't have to be a low price. It doesn't have to be an affordable price. So it's actually an anchoring and promotional device. And then they found that, oh my God, people will still pay that huge price online because a lot of prestige buyers are actually looking for that price premium, like that significant price, because it's status. What they're doing is they're doing exactly what you want them to do, which is buying an expensive product. So I think a lot of the art world has gone through that, and a lot of rest of the art world is going through it now, which is the realization of you don't have to sell yourself short online. You can price it at the right price. But that's a good thing, because you're sending a signal out to a much broader audience of, here's how expensive my work is, here's why it's that expensive. But you can just tell more people, and now you're telling a whole generation of people who are used to buying everything online, so you can reach them. And it's also true of older buyers. Like if you will get older buyers and collectors buying your work online if they can find the right validation points around your work, and they will look for it. Collectors will go, where else has this guy exhibited? Which galleries are buying his work? Am I actually ahead of the game by buying online? And there are a lot of people trawling the internet for that, because that's really what has changed as well about the collectors world. The collectors used to be highly dependent on the gallerists they knew, or the museums they knew that could open up the basement and show them private collections. But now collectors can go anywhere. Collectors can go and look at, Parsons collections on different sites. They can go and find the artists at much earlier stages of their career before anybody else has found them. So the internet has made everybody a bit of a gallerist and curator.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I get emails from another site that lists a lot of famous artist prints, and Jeff Koons puppy doll vases, and even Warhol drawings or something was on one of these emails I got this week. And I sometimes wish I could play that game, but I don't know how to, They're really brand name artists again.
I think you raise a really important point, and we've had artists mention this, which is your gallery contract. If you have a contract with gallery, and it prevents you from selling online, that's a pretty bad relationship. You need to figure out with them what is the online selling strategy. And if they're only selling on their own website and not listing you anywhere else, then that means you're going to miss out on, I'm not a big fan of eBay sales, but Amazon are spending a ton of money trying to sell art, and they're selling some art. You're not going to be listed on Artsy, which is spending a ton of money trying to sell art and selling some art. You're not going to be listed on Sachi, which is definitely selling a ton of art. There's the guys in the UK who do the prints, who do a fantastic job, and they're doing tens of millions a year. So if your gallery's not doing that job, they shouldn't contractually limit it from you doing it yourself.
Yeah, I think it's the new age, and these guys are 20-year-old dealers, or 20 years in at least. So I'm kind of like, I want them to move forward. That's my only frustration, is they don't build the brand outside of their bricks and mortar. It's quite insular.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
It's a patronage model. So they're used to a patronage model, and they don't want their buyers seeing other stuff, and they don't want their sellers seeing other stuff.
Yeah, my dealer told me he thought that he was like the father and the artists were all his children. And when he said that to me, I wanted to throw up. So anyway, thanks a lot.
Thank you both. Let's give Cheryl the last question. Cheryl, good evening. You are unmuted. Go ahead. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, thanks, Paul. Thanks, Owen. This is really great. Quick question. While you were talking, I loved your site. Tried to sign into Popt, and it says my email address is already being used. So I asked it to forward me my password, thinking maybe I have Alzheimer's, and it wouldn't do it. And I tried that twice.
Okay. So I'll send you my email address afterwards so we can make sure that's working, Cheryl. But
Okay.
thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that in real time.
Why don't you just give out your email address? And I think that means that Cheryl has Alzheimer's. I'm not sure.
Thank you, Paul.
So Cheryl and everybody else, my email address is eoin@popt.com, at pop.com. Again, that's just a funky spell. I'm Irish originally, so those 4 letters sound like Owen, but it's eoin@popt.com.
Beautiful. All right. Well, I appreciate all your information. I appreciate a better understanding of how, the internet functions and where it's going and where you're taking us. Let me unmute everybody so we can all thank you. I appreciate everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. It was great. Enjoy everyone.